the Mosaic Covenant, and this covenant begins with an incredible deliverance of Israel from bondage in Egypt. And we have to see the significance of God's redemptive act at the Exodus. Pharaoh is the king of Egypt. Pharaoh exalts himself as God. He says, "Who is the Lord? Who is the I am, that I should listen to him? Who is this God you talk of? I am God," Pharaoh says. Pharaoh is very much an antichrist figure. He takes Adam's rebellion and makes it his lifestyle, setting himself and his kingdom in opposition to the Lord and his kingdom. And so the battle between Israel and Egypt in the Exodus is really the battle between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan. The Lord himself wages war as the rightful king of Israel against Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And it begins as kind of a stalemate, doesn't it? Moses and Aaron, they throw their staffs down and become serpents. The magicians do it. And you kind of chuckle a little bit as you're reading through it, because the Lord is inflicting judgments on Egypt, and the magicians are making it worse. I mean, I think if I was Pharaoh, I'd have said, "Magicians, how about you show me you're powerful by reversing the judgment, not by furthering the judgment." But the magicians were like, "Oh, we can, turn the Nile into blood too. Look at that. Isn't that amazing?" And it kind of looks like maybe it's a stalemate. But as the plagues go on, the magicians begin to realize, no, this is something beyond us. This is the hand of God. This is the true God. And in one of the plagues, there's a graphic depiction of the battle that's going on between these two kingdoms. And it's the plague of darkness. And if you remember the plague of darkness, all of Egypt is covered in darkness, blanketed with a thick darkness. And then there's a note in Exodus, and it says this: "But in the land of Goshen, where Israel was, they had light in their dwellings." This is a graphic picture of the two kingdoms that are at war. You have the kingdom of darkness, which is Egypt, blanketed with darkness, under the darkness of Satan's rule. And you have the nation of Israel, which is representative of the kingdom of God, with light, the kingdom of light. And so God uses the plagues to demonstrate to the world the true nature of this conflict, that there are two kingdoms in conflict. And lest you think these are two human kingdoms in conflict, these are two supernatural kingdoms in conflict, the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of the devil. And then God destroys the firstborn in Egypt. But not just the firstborn in Egypt, he drowns Pharaoh and his army in the sea. And it's vital to the narrative that you understand God triumphs over Pharaoh personally and nationally. God destroys the head of Satan's kingdom personally, and he decimates the whole kingdom. The army is drowned in the sea. And you know why they kicked Israel out? Because they all said to Pharaoh, "If these people stay, we're all going to die," because they've already destroyed the whole kingdom with all these plagues. The whole kingdom is already ruined. The whole kingdom is already gone. Let's get them out of here while we're still alive. Pharaoh exalts himself above God and says, "Who is Yahweh? Who is the I am, that I should obey him?" And God responds. And Pharaoh, as he's gasping for his last breath as he goes down under the Red Sea, understands who I am is and the power of that kingdom. We might think, seeing all of that, Israel would submit to God, serve him as their rightful king. They enter into covenant with God in Exodus 19 and 20, and they say, everything that God says we will do. But before we even leave the book of Exodus, they have set up for themselves their own God, a golden calf, tried to establish their own kingdom in opposition to the kingdom of God, a rival kingdom to the kingdom of God. You would think you just watched what happens to rival kingdoms and how they get decimated by God's judgment. Why on earth would you ever set up a rival kingdom to the kingdom of God, having just seen what happens? But that's the depth of sin in the heart of man. That entire generation that saw God's miracles in Egypt dies in the wilderness because they don't believe the promise. They sink further and further into sin and rebellion in the book of Judges, to the point where they think to themselves, you know what we really need? We need to become a kingdom like all the other kingdoms of the world. Can you imagine? This is their conclusion. That's the problem, that they are just like all the other kingdoms of the world. That's not the solution. The solution to the problem is to submit to God's kingship. But their solution to the problem is we need a king like all the other nations have a king. Having a king was not a problem for the nation of Israel because God had promised a king. The problem was they didn't want God's king. They wanted a king like the nations. They wanted to be led not by Christ, but by Antichrist. So they get Saul. They reject God from being their king. They seek to establish their own kingdom. They plunge themselves further and further into sin and idolatry. And finally, the northern kingdom falls to Assyria. The southern kingdom falls to Babylon. And the prophets are left to reflect on the failure that was the kingdom of Israel. The Mosaic Covenant turns out to be a covenant Israel could not keep. And if there's one thing that we feel as we get to the end of the Old Testament narrative and Israel is in exile, and then they come back and have a temple that is not even an echo of what used to be, is we need the real king. We need a priest king who will fulfill God's covenant perfectly because we can't do it. Israel couldn't do it. We can't do it.